I would say that there is significant political will in Ghana to fight corruption, to prosecute corruption cases, to bring the perpetrators of corruption against the nation to book, because it is felt in Ghana that corruption really affects the whole country. I think that that's something that I don't think you'll find anyone disputing that. So we've seen a lot of support for our sensitization efforts on corruption, a lot of support for reworking the legislation and for the remaining legislation that has to be passed. For Ghana in particular, we last year rolled out, I would say, it's still at the early stages, but presented a national anti-corruption action plan, which had been worked on for 2 years prior to that, a multi-stakeholder action plan, so that it's non-partisan. It was not put together by a particular party or particular group, had representation from all over. To really look at what needs to be done at every level, from district all the way up to the executive, to combat corruption. And we've had a lot of support for that action plan, for it to be adopted as a national action plan. Going further, I think that there's political will across Africa. You're seeing a number of regional groupings forming because there's this common will to battle it, to collaborate, to work towards mutual legal assistance, to work to fine-tune how to get information from our colleagues in other countries when corruption cases or corruption investigations cross borders. There's really a meeting of minds and a coming together to say, how are we going to work in our respective countries to battle this?
Africa, arise. Let's fight corruption in our continent. In our continent. Africa, arise. Let's fight corruption in our continent. In our continent. If we fight against corruption.
Corruption seriously impacts negatively on the day-to-day lives of ordinary Africans. On the one hand, we have grand corruption, which involves substantial amounts of money and usually high-level officials within a national or local government, thereby leading to a broad erosion of confidence in good governance, the rule of law, and economic stability. On the other hand, we have petty corruption, which involves the exchange of very small amounts of money, typically involving more junior officials, the granting of minor favors by those seeking preferential treatment, or employment of friends and relatives in minor positions. The most critical difference between grand corruption and petty corruption is that the former involves corruption within central or local governments, while the latter develops and exists within the context of established governance and social frameworks.
As far as the corruption is anywhere, it affects everybody in the society. You see, because if the corruption is in the country, it affects even the rural area for development. You see, because at the country's independence from 1957 up to now, and we see no changes. I mean, we don't know what is going on. You see, so the government is supposed to be serious, intervene, and come in our aid. If you go around, you see people carrying things in the traffic here and there. Because of what? They have no job.
There is a link between corruption and the lack of sustainable development, in which, where there is corruption, development is compromised. And I'll tell you why. When funds are allocated for schools and those funds are stolen, you know the consequence? It's compromising the quality of education and the nature of human capital society is going to produce. That's the consequence, number one. When money for roads are stolen, what does that mean? Infrastructure will be depleted. How do you do business? Okay, then that is compromised. So when money for medicines, are stolen and medical facilities are stolen, what happens? Society will not be healthy because the facilities that medical facilities that people should have is already compromised. So you can see how it erodes a whole development framework, a whole development structure.
La corruption est un problème vraiment très important en Afrique, puisque là, ça affecte beaucoup de domaines, le développement et tout ça. Mais je me demande bien, étant que population, nous là, nous ne pouvons rien faire de ça. On peut travailler personnellement, mais il y a des grandes institutions ou bien organisations comme l'Union africaine et tout ça. J'aimerais bien, et je pense que si eux pouvaient faire quelque chose pour se battre contre la corruption et puis fournir des efforts afin que la corruption, d'abord dans les institutions, puisse être bannie. Et là maintenant la population va suivre derrière. Après. Et puis c'est un peu ça.
Several stakeholders allude to the need for regional institutions to develop solutions that can be applied in the respective African countries towards tackling corruption. Indeed, it must be said that a number of instruments and frameworks have been established at continental and regional levels in Africa towards fighting corruption.
En ce qui concerne le continent africain, la volonté de juguler, ou tout au moins de freiner l'élan de la corruption, a permis aux chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la partie australe de notre continent de signer le protocole de la SADC contre la corruption le 14 août 2001. Les chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Afrique de l'Ouest ont signé le protocole de la CEDEAO de lutte contre la corruption le 21 décembre 2001. Les chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union africaine ont signé la Convention de l'Union africaine sur la prévention et la lutte contre la corruption le 11 juillet 2003 à Maputo.
Corruption is unquestionably one of the most pressing governance and development challenges that Africa is confronted with today. This explains why the international community generally, and the African countries in particular, have shown remarkable commitment in tracking the problem of corruption, especially in the past decade and a half, as evidenced in the number of anti-corruption instruments, frameworks, and legal norms that have been developed at the global, regional, sub-regional, and national levels. The results of these efforts have, however, been very mixed indeed. The spread of corruption has remained unrelenting. These realities have presented a major challenge to the African leaders. African regional and sub-regional organizations, as well as global stakeholders such as United Nations, to the effect that more needs to be done to increase the prospect of winning the battle against the scourge of corruption, including through greater collaboration.
Towards supporting greater regional collaboration in the fight against corruption, in Africa, one of the key components of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption is the creation of the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, which was created with the mandate of coordinating the fight against corruption in Africa.
The African Union Advisory Board on Corruption is a creation of Article 22 of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption in Africa. The functions of the board are spelled out clearly under that article. Among others, is to coordinate. The board major function is to coordinate all the anti-corruption measures in Africa through dissemination of information. 3, to come with methodologies on how to address multinational companies' corruption in Africa. 4thly, to collect data, documentations, and information about corruption in Africa. 5thly, to report to the Council of Ministers of the African Union on matters pertaining to corruption on annual basis. So the body has to report through the Council before it goes to the summit.
And the African Union Advisory Board, as part of the mechanisms of implementing the convention, has a certain role to play in terms of monitoring the implementation of the convention. And I must say that the EU, and especially the board, have so far been doing lots of work. Last year I was part of Alexpec's team to develop a model legislation for setting up really truly independent anti-corruption institutions with a view to helping countries emerging from war and conflict, where you had the systems were destroyed and they are now trying to build up and they are weak. So the African Union and through the advisory board then took this initiative.
A key feature of ECA's approach in the fight against corruption consists of foreign strategic partnership with relevant stakeholders. One of the strategic partnerships that ECA has more forged in this regard is with the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, AU-ABC, which is a follow-up mechanism provided for in the African Union Corruption on preventing and combating corruption and related offences, charged with monitoring the implementation of the AU Convention on Corruption and advising the AU and its member states on various dimensions of the fight against corruption.
A key function of the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption involves sending missions to respective African countries to determine the extent to which African Union member states are domesticating the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. Recently, the Executive Secretary of the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, Professor Adolf Lawson, led a mission to Cameroon, during which it was indicated that the country has already ratified the African Union Convention with measures towards domestication.
Je voudrais, à titre principal, dans le cadre de mes responsabilités, dire à l'occasion de cette visite que le Cameroun, sous la très haute autorité du président de la République, a exprimé sa volonté politique, son engagement à lutter contre la corruption et globalement à promouvoir la bonne gouvernance financière en particulier. Le Cameroun a ratifié, signé la Convention de l'Union africaine. Le Cameroun a également signé la Convention des Nations Unies dans ce domaine-là. Et comme vous savez, les processus sont en cours en vue de parachever ce processus par la ratification. Cela étant, le Cameroun est déjà engagé par des actions concrètes à réaliser le triptyque que nous connaissons dans ce domaine-là, la détection, la prévention d'abord, la détection des mauvais comportements à travers les contrôles et la répression. Nous sommes donc ce pays, cet État, sous la très haute égide du président de la République, qui a affirmé sa volonté et qui la met en œuvre par les comportements et les décisions que nous suivons.
Nous sommes particulièrement reconnaissants de faire cette visite au ministre chargé de la lutte contre la corruption du Cameroun. Notre démarche a été dictée d'une part pour féliciter le Cameroun qui a déjà signé cette convention de lutte contre la corruption, mais de voir quelles sont mesures qui sont prises pour que le Cameroun ratifie cette convention et devienne État partie à cette convention, pour que les bonnes expériences qui sont exprimées, enfin, qui sont vécues au Cameroun, soient partagées par les autres États africains. Mais de par les discussions que j'ai eues avec monsieur le ministre, je vois que bon, l'inquiétude n'est pas au rendez-vous et que bientôt le Cameroun va faire partie de la famille africaine de lutte contre la corruption.
As part of its mandate under the African Union Convention, the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption is expected to support anti-corruption agencies in Africa.
Another function is to coordinate the anti-corruption agencies. I understand they have not yet started reporting, but they are supposed to be reporting on an annual basis state parties' activities or the measures undertaken to implement the African Union Convention preventing and combating corruption.
As part of its role regarding coordinating anti-corruption agencies in Africa, the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption has been instrumental in the establishment of the Association of African Anti-Corruption Agencies.
We had a conference of heads of African anti-corruption institutions. I can say that about 99% or say 95% of the cost of that conference was borne by the EU Advisory Board on Corruption. And there is the indication that they will continue to support, because it is in the interest of Africa that corruption is dealt with.
The President of Ghana, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, provided the keynote address during the second assembly of the Association of African Anti-Corruption Agencies, which was hosted in Accra by the Ghanaian Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice.
On behalf of the government and people of Ghana, I want to welcome all of you to our country for the second conference of anti-corruption authorities in Africa. I'd like to commend our chairperson and staff of the Commission of Human Rights and Administrative Justice for collaborating with its partners to organize this important event, and also for their kind invitation for me to participate in it. Indeed, I'm told this event is aimed at consolidating the anti-corruption gains made since the first conference was held in June 2011 in Bujumbura in Burundi. This second conference is therefore a welcome addition to that one. I'm informed that you took very significant steps to foster cooperation and mutual dialogue at the first conference. You resolved, among other things, to form an association of anti-corruption authorities in Africa as a mechanism through which you would cooperate and assist one another in areas such as mutual legal assistance, law enforcement, joint investigations, tracking and recovery of ill-gotten assets in the spirit of Article 19 of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption.
Associations which first started in Burundi in 2011. There the concept was born and an agreement was there that we should establish this association with a view really to enhancing our participation as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. At that time, it was the principle that was agreed. But this second meeting now, it's about really coming to sit down, adopt the constitution, and then be able to establish a permanent committee as against the interim committee that has been set. So it's a step really in the fight against corruption, but we are really graduating from the concept to the materialization and operationalization of the idea itself.
Le gouvernement du Burundi a toujours soutenu les initiatives de la mise en application
de la Convention africaine de lutte contre la corruption était de sauver et suggérer la création d'une plateforme continentale pour rendre effectives les conventions des Nations Unies et de l'Union africaine contre la corruption. Cette idée amènera donc les autorités de l'IACA a organisé en juin 2011 à Bujumbura la première conférence des institutions africaines de lutte contre la corruption, dont la présente conférence d'Accra est le prolongement.
During the second assembly of the Association of African Anti-Corruption Agencies, Mr. Charles Ayamdu, the director of the Anti-Corruption Division of the Ghanaian Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, was elected as the inaugural president of the Association of African Anti-Corruption Agencies.
And our mandate of both the president, who is a member of the executive committee, is to monitor and ensure the implementation of the objectives of the association. And one of the objectives of the association, or as a foundation for establishing the association, is to cooperate amongst ourselves, assist ourselves mutually in our investigations, prosecutions, and also assist in recovering stolen wealth. One of the difficult things is about asset recovery. Where the assets are, the countries where the assets are have a different understanding of it. And I must say here, we returned from Vienna. There was a session on asset recovery. In African countries who are the victims, have a different stand. The other countries are very different. So it's a very difficult area. I would like the African Association to push this further, to ensure that the procedures for recovering assets stolen and dashed outside are made simpler and easier, because they always talk about issue of jurisdictions and what the requirements that one has to go through. They are very, very sometimes very frustrating, as I took it from Vienna. And also we have a similar body, which is the International Association of Anti-Corruption Authorities. The impact that they have made is very significant in the world. I would also like the African Association to have that impact.
Dans la corruption, dans la corruption, Africa dans la corruption, à la corruption, on fait accentuer famine, conséquences maladie, à cause de la corruption.
Riche continent, dépourvu d'évolution due à la mauvaise gouvernance politique et financière, nos richesses volées, une éducation corrompue qui promouvoit la voyoucratie sénile dans les rues d'Afrique. Lève-toi Afrique, et bats-toi contre la corruption qui détruit les mœurs et ton avenir.